I'm Kevin Davis, and this is the Catholic Family Podcast, and I'm very honored and pleased to be joined again by Father Stephen McKenna, a regular to the show and a regular to the series that we have been doing for the last few months that is really covering, I suppose we call it the basics of philosophy. And that's kind of a misnomer because can you really have basics of philosophy? And philosophy is a very complicated topic, but Father's done a really good job of bringing these difficult topics really into, I guess, the understanding of the layman. I can tell you that for sure because I am very much a layman when it comes to these types of topics, and I've generally understood what Father has said. Now, there's been a couple times where I've had to, kind of listen twice, and my head's almost exploded. But that is still a respect to Father for even getting me that far that I basically understand. And today we're going to talk about the Hegelian philosophy. And it's something that Father assures me, and we talked a little bit before the show, that is something that's very prominent in today's society. And it's also going to, we're going to talk a little bit about not conspiracy theories, but if you're, I don't know, if you're kind of insecure with those types of things, or you don't want to hear about us talking about what's going on in the world today, then, well, you might want to go listen to a different philosophy podcast, because I think this one might get interesting, it might get a little bit spicy, as I always know it will with Father McKenna. Father, after that long introduction, thanks as always for coming on. I always love having you on the show, and I'm excited to hear about this this philosophy.
Yeah, so thanks, Kevin. It is true that we start getting into stuff that is relevant in today's society, but that is the whole entire idea behind modern philosophy, and my choosing of the various points of modern philosophy to talk about is ultimately, what is relevant today and what is relevant going around to us, and so that's where, because there's so much to choose from, and you can only drink so much modern philosophy garbage, so it better have something of some point of relevancy in order to be worth time to look into. And so, yeah, so today we're going to dive into the philosophy of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. A nice
Wonder where he's from.
Irish name.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, he is very much from that school of German philosophers in the 18th and 19th centuries, coming from the lineage of Kant and Fichte and things like that. And so and they have all these very, we got into them a bit with some of the topics of last time, and as we got into empiricism and idealism and things like that. And we're moving a little further on with that. And there's many aspects to the different things of Hegel's philosophy, and I'm not going to dive into all of that. What I'm going to focus on primarily, actually, is what is known as Hegelian dialectics. And this is the mode of sort of reasoning and progression that for man that Hegel came up with. And to the idea of dialectics kind of gives you a little bit of a clue that die, meaning of two, so that it's that you're going to have 2 points, and that and you argue between the 2 points. Under Hegel's idea, what you have for man is you have 2 seemingly opposing ideas, and that you sort of war out between the 2 ideas, and so he calls them the thesis and the antithesis. So like one and the opposite side of that, one idea and the opposite idea of that, the thesis and the antithesis, and that these 2 ideas are allowed to be debated back and forth in a man's mind, in an actuality, and then eventually from that he's able to see the picture at a wider spread, and a better understanding between the two seemingly opposing ideas, and come to what he calls is a synthesis of the ideas, which is a joining together. You take like sort of you have a better understanding of the truth between two ideas by by debating the contrary 2 points and then coming to sort of like a meeting in the middle somewhere. It might be 50-50, it might be 70-30, it might be 90-10, but you've now, by seeing a thing from two polarizing sides, you're able to have a better understanding and a better realization of reality. And that's his idea of how man progresses and how man grows and has a better understanding and rationalizes. And he and that it's from this process that higher ideals come, and then that synthesis now becomes sort of your new thesis, as it were. And now it can stay where it is until you can find something contrary to that, and then you can work those out. And so it becomes this ever kind of growing web, if you will. You have antithesis and thesis and antithesis. It comes to a synthesis, then you add another antithesis and they war it out, and then it comes to a new idea, and then so on and so forth. And that's how man progresses in his logic and his understanding of the world around him, according to Hegel. This is kind of a simplified idea of it, but the basis of it is true.
And so Father, so
For
does that mean I can take what I should be doing here is trying chocolate ice cream and vanilla ice cream and testing them against each other, and eventually I ended up with a swirl? Is that kind of what we're?
yeah, yeah, or you get vanilla ice cream with chocolate sauce on it, or you get you're not, you make the joke, Kevin, but it's not too far off from reality. One would, I guess, under the Hegelian point, kind of argue that chocolate and vanilla aren't opposing ideas of ice cream, right? Whereas they're both equally ice cream. But you could take the idea of ice cream, like dessert versus main course meal, and then come to sort of like the conclusion, do your meat and potatoes or your ice cream? Which do you compare and contrast, and benefits and plus and minuses of both sides? And you come to the realization that, okay, somewhere in between those is that for the majority of my consumption, I should eat the things that are healthy, but I shouldn't completely neglect the things that are, just for the pleasure of the taste and things like that. And so that would be under Hegel's kind of concept, that you'd come to the conclusion that I should eat 3 square meals a day, and then maybe sometimes we'll have a piece of cake mixed in there, or a bowl of ice cream on occasion for to satisfy the sweet tooth. That is something that that's how he would sort of argue in that regard, if you want to use the food analogy. So it's not a bad analogy.
I can tell you, Father, that my 3-year-old daughter would certainly disagree, and she would definitely say that ice cream is always the answer. But anyway,
well then that's where Hegel would say that, well, she hasn't made the necessary steps of progression to realize the benefits to meat and vegetables and potatoes and things like that.
That might be true. Hegel might have something there, at least.
Well, I'm not trying to give too much credit where Hegel is coming from, but we can see where what he's trying to get at, right? Is that what he's trying to lay out in explanation is that, having discourse between two contrary ideas isn't always necessarily a bad thing, and that sometimes you can, that maybe it does develop in this process. However, where he's very wrong is that all of man's existence, to Hegel, sort of breaks down into this ever evolving reality, that the ideals, that there is no real set of ideal. There's no ultimate highest point. It's just a better understanding that you can get, and the fact that he always says that it comes from, like, the struggle is necessary in Hegel's mind. You have to have the struggle to be able to have the progression, which again is problematic in that. And so because of the fact that what your essential argument boils down to is that it's the chaos that creates the order, and, or as Hegel wants to say, it's this that this becoming is superior to the being, and we mean being by actual existence. So like the becoming is the potentiality, and the being is the actuality. But under the Hegelian system, it's flipped on its head, because we know that existence is from scholastic philosophy, and basic, which just for the people thinking, just think along those lines. When I say scholastic philosophy, obviously that's the philosophy that the church uses, the basis from Aristotle and through St. Thomas Aquinas. But you can use it as a general term for the church's philosophy, or when I say sort of like the scholastic mode, oftentimes it's also can be equated to what normal human reasoning could be assumed to be, kind of our own rational, what makes sense, what is a rational thought. So from that scholastic mode, we know that existence is better than non-existence, and so therefore existence is greater than um, than potential existence in a philosophical sense. And it is why, and it has its foundation right in the very beginning, the first principles of logic, that you can't nothing can't produce something. Nothing comes from nothing. Something only can come from something else. And so it's why we know God exists. It's the first principle of the argument towards God, that there had to be something that was greater than the sum of all of the parts to be added up to it, all of creation, and had to exist before all of creation, meaning that it is infinite, because something can't come from nothing. It can't just magically appear out of nothingness. And Hegel rejects this very idea, that he rejects that the concept that something can't come from nothing, which doesn't make sense. That all of a sudden there was just empty space, and then boom, with no action, no actor, then there's a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of planets and stars and life and everything like that. That it could be just an accident that came from absolute nothing to into existence. It's so hard to even fathom that, making that argument. But what Hegel puts his emphasis on is that that being even a concept automatically means it has some realm of existence. And so he gets himself all twisted up. He ends up being sort of, it's sort of kind of crazy the way he views things. But it's, and it's that aspect that, but though that it comes to us, that the progress that we're making, that if we create enough chaos, then that will lead to order. But you can never have more order than what in its original state. So like think of it as like a glass of milk. No matter how many times you pour out the milk out of the glass, you will never create a situation where the milk is more ordered than when it was in the glass, because that chaos that is milk spilling across the table can't reorganize itself into a better fashion. You could come up with a more organized, more ornate container and pour that into it, but you had to create the container you had to create the situation of order and then apply the things into that mold in order to get a greater state of order. If you're going to introduce if you just allow it to exist in what we call chaos, the randomness of action upon something, well, then that can't create better order, if that makes sense.
And sorry if would he say then, so would he say the same thing about morality then? I mean, would you have to compare and contrast good and bad, say, I mean, in order to find true good? I mean, are you looking at, I don't know, God and the devil, and then you're looking at God and the devil, and you're somewhere in the middle? You got to find that truth somewhere in the middle. Is that kind of what he's aiming at here?
You're actually hitting on a really important point here, because yes, everything with Hegel is basically this like evolutionary process, and so like this idea, which is why, and another philosophy class down the road soon to come, I plan on doing actually, Darwinian evolution as its own philosophy by itself, and it's it has its roots in the Hegelian aspect of that. But yeah, you're right, and what Hegel's mind is like the highest, the best right, or like the or at least the sliding scale of rightness or correctness, is that every degree of of um, of dialectic process that you go through, every aspect of that, you get greater consciousness and greater liberty, and that's where the good for him comes in. And so that you have better ability, you are more conscious of things as they are, and you're able to make more choices, because you have that greater understanding that comes in. And so the ultimate aspects of right really end up being this consciousness and liberty, which again, are in and of themselves, not that can't be, we can't you can't end up coming to goodness from that, because it completely ignores man's fallen human nature, man's selfishness, man's, it looks past, so much in that, to think that liberty and is the ultimate good to be derived, in that. And but what he also adds to it, though, is that man's liberty can only extend so far, but the ultimate keeper of of that level of liberty is the state. So here's where it's interesting it comes in, because there's a recognition by Hegel that not every man is at the same point of discovery and of argumentation and processing through these dialectic forms. Not every man is going to have agreement on the synthesis, revolving around it. And so therefore, if you have all these people with all these different ideas, which his process of liberty, ultimate liberty, if you have complete liberty, then it necessarily causes just more, again, if you want to see the problem with it, you can't get more order out of chaos, because if you have everybody left to their own devices to come up with their own solutions with absolutely no restrictions on what their best mode of operation is and what the best thing to do is, you will end up with a total chaotic society, because you will end up.
So sorry, Father. I've got an example. I have to say, because I've literally just come across this with I was arguing with a guy about Nazism. It happens more often than anyone would imagine. But and he was like, so I was arguing with him. I was like, hey, look, I've been to Dachau. I've read the books. I've read letters from priests. I've read letters from Pius XII and Pius XI. I mean, I it's not like I'm just coming to this blind. He's like, well, have you really honestly done the research into the Nazis? Have you actually read their side? Have you actually looked at what they have to say about it? And it's like, well, No.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, I mean,
Why do I need to? Come on.
yeah. I mean, it's sort of like I mean, there's probably things to be gleaned there towards the truth ultimately, if we are like really honest about it, right? Like it's because but it's again, it's to the same degree. It's like I'm not going into it thinking that it's going to change my mind that Nazi Germany and Hitler were not, the good guys and necessarily, but uh, you could make the argument though in seeing that, were they not the good guys and there was a good guy, or that was it again
Right.
another situation, as we'll explore a little on, where you have bad guys versus bad guys, and you and that's the ultimate question of those things. You can understand that better from it. You can also understand where the problem, like what are the origins of the problem, so you can not repeat it in the future potentially, because if you look at it, it's sort of like, it's sort of like this idea that you, if what it's like if you look at somebody that I don't know, let's say you just happen down the street and you see like me just wailing away punching on some guy in the face. It's very easy to just look at that and say, father shouldn't be just like wailing and punching a guy in the face. But other than the fact of me being like a lunatic, there also has to be some level of catalyst that led to that incident in happening. And so, yeah, you can look at it and say, talk about, let's learn from history and see what led to this rise of Nazi Germany and this ultimate cause and effect relationship, so we can look at the whole problem rather than just the snippet of the problem. You have to sit here and say, well, I have, I'm not going I'm not going to just take the like the revisionist history and just accept it as is per se. I'm going, I should be allowed to look at it with a critical mind and realize, okay, how do we get to that point? How do we get to a point where you have uh, basically an entire nation that's sort of okay with some of the crazy things that happened during that time frame, and not just one nation, but multiple nations? How do you end up in that reality? And again, we'll talk about it a little later on, but it has to do with the ties to this Hegelian idea as well, that uh, that that leaves people choosing a side, um, rather than being objective and looking at all parts of the system that was going on. um, Anyways, but it's I think, but you like, yeah, the idea of ultimate liberty, right? Going back to that point, you we can't, if everybody has ultimate liberty, then you end up with anarchy, and anarchy is complete chaos. Um, and it'll result in violence and murder, in burning of cities. I mean, to take BLM stuff that happened a couple summers ago and ramp that up to 1 million, and that is anarchy, because that is man's fallen human nature. And so this Hegelian idea that Hegel recognizes that, to some degree, even though he says liberty is the greatest, it's like that ultimate, what you obtain more and more liberty, the more and more steps down the dialectic tree you go. He himself recognizes that not everybody's at the same spot, and it's going to cause this chaos, because he just fails to see that that's the natural outcome of chaos, of struggle and strife. You introduce chaos, you're going to create more chaos, not more order. And so he instead puts in that the state's job is to take basically the ideas that are like, where everybody's sort of like the progression of ideas where everybody's comfortable, and make that and put an order to it, so that somebody's control. It's it's like if you took your how old is your daughter that likes the ice cream?
3.
So it's like if you took your 3-year-old daughter and all of her friends, like that she from like she, all of her peers, and you put them into a room. I mean, that's going to be a giant set of chaos, and so you need an adult in the room to sort of like keep things a little bit ordered, like, okay, we will allow certain things to go on, but we won't allow other certain things to happen. That's the mindset of Hegel, and the implication of the state, that somebody needs to look at society as a whole and say, this is how far we've progressed, that by like sort of general consensus, and that these are the parameters of our society today. Doesn't mean that it can't change tomorrow. It can, but man has to accept what society is, what the state has deemed as acceptable for today. So you have this sort of open door of continued progression, which we get in modern democratic ideals, that it's sort of basically mob rule, that it's, there's no you still don't have any concrete right or wrong. You still don't have any absolute truth. You still don't have any right reasoning and process in this all. You just have sort of what is acceptable for society as a whole today, and that is acceptable. And moreover, that man's liberty must be, and individuality is, and his individual rights must be subservient to the state, therefore, as well. So because if the state is the quote unquote adult in the room, because we have neither God nor absolute truth, then then the state is the ultimate ruler, if it will, and so therefore the state is the highest end, and man as an individual, he can develop his own rights and his own liberty as long as it's within the parameters of the state, and ultimately everything is subservient to the state, that he is ultimately just a cog in the machine, and that it is his duty to serve that apparatus as the greater aspect. So even in that, it seems to sort of contradict itself again, and so we can see in looking at all of this that Hegel's idea, as we kind of talked about, doesn't really get off the ground. Creating more chaos doesn't solve anything except create chaos, and having these warring ideas doesn't create solutions. It just creates more problems, especially when you have no real truth, no God. So what do we end up with is something that doesn't work, and now it should end there, except we live in a world where this Hegelian philosophy is so prevalent that it is forced upon us constantly. Because while Hegelian thought process doesn't work in reality, those who are the powers that be, the people in charge, realize that if you give the two choices to the populace, and you've chosen the opposing choices well and constructed how the strife is to go between them, then you can possibly direct it toward a desired synthesis. So because you are still adding up ideas and trying to come to a higher idea. It's just that you've already you've constructed that reality to be something that to us seems just like chaos and strife, but to those who are in charge is really an organized chaos that is meant to serve an already predetermined and desired outcome to come from that, because it necessitates change, and it necessitates and allows for upheaval and overthrowing and redoing of societies and things like that. And so that is why it's so important today, because if you think about it, right, you would say if under Hegel, like the idea that the strife between two ideas means that that's a good thing, well then isn't it necessarily then that war is a good thing? And yes, Hegel would say yes. And so those who have utilized his philosophy now in modern times, and it didn't take long for them to get going on this, they recognize that orchestrated Hegelian dialectics is something that, yeah, that's why you have war hawks in government, because war is that necessary strife, and war can lead to these things. But there's other aspects of it that we see in our daily existence regularly. We are constantly given these two opposing ideas and then told that a better outcome will come from that. Well, I know you live in Germany now, but there's probably something very similar in Germany. But the idea of Democrat and Republican here in the United States, if you think that one side is good and one side is bad, then you're missing the picture you're missing the forest through the trees, because the things that they argue about are the minutia, and rarely does anything actually get productively done. I'm going to say something extremely controversial with that, but case in point is how many times have we been told we have to go and vote for president that would be the quote unquote pro-life president, and 50% of the time that guy gets in there. How many times have they done anything to overturn abortion in any kind of real, legitimate, substantial way? Never has it happened. Even with Trump putting in Supreme Court justices and them having a new ruling, all they did was kick it back to the states, and all the states are pretty much allowing abortion to go on as normal. It's a veneer to disguise what is actually happening. It's like, all those years you had people like Bush and Bush Senior and Reagan in the White House. And every year they would have the March for Life, and you have, hundreds of thousands of people walking down the street up to the White House. They never addressed any of the people. All you would have to do is step out. He could come out in his pajamas, for crying out loud, and say like, "Hey, great job, guys! Keep it up."
I think Trump did, though. I think Trump did in his final year. That's the one thing he did. At least do that, yeah.
Trump did, yeah. Trump being a populist, knows that sometimes you actually got to put your face out there personally to continue on that message. I'm not here to get in the argument of whether Trump is good or bad or not. I don't believe in the orange savior myself, but
me neither.
But you can. I think most of the good that was done was minor, and really it was just a slower form of progression, but it makes man feel like that. But I mean, if you want to understand that where this ultimately comes from, that it's not it's not one side. There are these people who are controlling narrative, and um, and in leading you to believe that this strife is necessary, that you need to go and yell at your neighbor who has the Democratic candidate du jour sign in their yard or whatever it may be. Um, think about it from the prospect of some of the true sources of power in the country, where they come from and how they act. Think about this reality. We had John Kerry run against George W. Bush for president in the presidential election. Both of them were from Yale University, from the Society of the Skull and Bones. Right? Something that is only for senior students in Yale and only take 15 new members a year. And they are just one of many examples that come from just that society alone of that. When you had Bush Sr., who was a bonesman in there, the head of the Democratic Assembly was also a bonesman, and so it's that's your Hegelian dialectic. You have these two sides warring against each other, but they come from the same source and the same political juggernaut machine that it is churning these people out and gearing them to go into this reality. You have Pat Buchanan and Bill Clinton, both as products of the poli-sci system at Georgetown University. And why is that important? Because they're so far opposing on the seemingly opposing on the political spectrum, but the reality of it is that it's more facade than it is truth, based in that way. But it's meant to create a conflict in which you have to take a side in that, and have to create that friction and that chaos, and so that you can ultimately have these things. And it's so ingrained into us that this Hegelian reality was instituted into our education system, so that everybody grows up in the United States. If you go to a public school, a public institution for schooling, by being indoctrinated in this Hegelian method of learning, first and foremost, that you become subject, that you are subservient, your own rights and things like that are subservient to the overall good of the state, and that you are at that state's service ultimately in the end. And that was all instituted and pushed through in a total education reform by John Dewey, who was a great Hegelian philosophy and psychology student, who then came into major portions of control in the education system for the United States. And while theoretically that idea of removal of individual liberty for the service of the state would seem contrary to the constitutional law of the United States, at the same time, the way they pushed it through was by major funding from large organizations like the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation and the Peabody Foundation and all of these foundations. They funded pushing forward with this new educational system of John Dewey. And so you learn without realizing it, by the modes in which they teach, that you are indoctrinated into this Hegelian-like system of education, and that ever progresses as well, which is why now, because it's reaching a true state of chaos and a true state of absurdity, we're able to better realize that, where are all these ideas for this major push for transgenderism coming from? It's coming from the universities. Where are all these major ideas and pushes for socialism coming from? It's coming from universities and Marxism and systematic manufactured systematic racism and all these things. It's all coming from universities and public schools and the whole alphabet soup agenda is all from these sources. So, hold on, I think. Can you hear the lawnmower? I think the lawn
It's okay.
is okay.
A little bit, but it's not. I don't think it's going to be too much of a bother.
Okay, if it does, I can close the windows. So, but then, so that's where that all comes from. It's institutionalized in our education system, and then you end up with this strife and this never-ending development of ideas that is very progressive in its nature. And so, and you're meant to choose sides so that you think that you have control over where it's going, but you don't. This is a quote from Hegel himself about this. Um, he said, by virtue of this participation, subjective liberty and conceit with their general opinion, individuals can show themselves palpably efficacious and enjoy the satisfaction of feeling themselves to count for something. So what he's saying is that, by having the idea of you are choosing a side, you are making a vote, you are picking a candidate, you have these representatives in government and things like that. You feel like you are actually directing the direction of society, but in reality it is nothing. It is merely just a feeling of you having control over where you're going, and in reality it's the system itself is controlling. Under Hegel's idea, it's the chaos that is ensued from the strife that comes to its own conclusion, and from the actual reality of it, we know it to be that it is the people who are manufacturing the strife that come to that. Hold on.
It did get a bit louder there, Father.
He's right outside the window.
Yeah, no problem. You must have some nice weather though, Father, if you're able to keep your windows open.
Yeah,
End of October now. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's gorgeous here. It's southern Ohio, so it's it's, the lawnmower is creating a Hegelian strife. Chaos created by this leads to the logical conclusion of closing my windows. So, but no, it's so in the system of the state is supposed to be controlling it under Hegel because it is the ultimate orderer, and man is subservient to it. And so therefore, by participating in it, man thinks that he's doing something, but in reality, he's not. And his only benefit to the state is that if by chance he happens to come across accidentally some sort of good idea that they can utilize and put into their plan, then that can be a potential contribution, but nothing more than that. That as it says that that the quote unquote peasant may accidentally demonstrate wisdom, and so that it's merely that is the only benefit it has. Otherwise, man is just meant to serve society, and that this idea of these contrary things are designed to institute overarching change to society that is already orchestrated. Again, if we want an example of how that tree works, right? If you go back to you had these nationalistic Freemasonic revolutions, United States, France, Italy, etc. that warred against the church and the state. And we know those revolutions, the secular society revolutions, came out on top. And then you had these largely secular but still sort of empirical aspects come together and war in World War One. And then so you had your two factions in that, and it comes to the antithesis of to the synthesis from there of having less fanatical revolutionary states, but still very secularized, and um, you now ended up with that state. So think of think of Germany under the Kaiser, right? And that developed into this very firm nationalistic and bloodline identity aspect from there. So you had the German state, which won the last synthesis, the thesis versus antithesis, and became the synthesis. Now it is faced up against the aspect of Soviet Union, and because remember, in World War II, the Soviet Union was our allies, they were the good guys, right? And so you now had them warring out, and you get rid of this ultra nationalistic idea, and you have the remainder of the Soviet Union. Then the Soviet Union, which stood in contrast to the idea of capitalism. So you had the Cold War erupt from that, where we weren't necessarily fighting against Russia, but we were fighting proxy wars in their place. So we were fighting in Vietnam, we were fighting in Korea, we were fighting or almost fighting in Cuba, and we're creating all these trade embargoes and all this constant pressure from the idea of two contrary ideas of communism and capitalism. So much so that not only do we fight the proxy wars in Korea and in Vietnam, but then we also actually support we support Al Qaeda and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to kick out the Soviets. And then from there, now it becomes, oh, well, wait a second. We can't have this, like now we view the Afghanis and that whole Eastern idea as contrary to our world. So then it becomes us versus Afghanistan. And then now we come out of that, and now it's more of a collective aspect. We are that large representation of the West, and now we come to today's current aspects of conflict: Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine representing the West in its desire to join up with the UN, and Russia representing the East. Israel, Palestine. Israel, the great, quote unquote ally of the West, and Palestine. And all of these things, ultimately, what they're moving towards, so you're just getting further and further along the tree, and their idea of progression is to reset society in a way that goes away from individual national identity to a globalistic identity. That it's, that Ukraine wants to be part of NATO. Last I checked, NATO stood for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Where does the North Atlantic come into contact with?
Where's
with
Ukraine?
The Ukraine? Yeah, it's, where do we have that to be? Where do we have, we have Israel, who, as supposedly the great, ally of the West. First off, show me something that was beneficial to us that they've ever done for us. I dare you to, and don't say that they allow us to park our planes there so we can fight more wars in the Middle East. That's not a good thing, Like they stir up the proverbial hornet's nest and then wait for us to come clean up the garbage every single time. But you're meant to think Israel's west, Palestine is east, But you've inserted this stick into the hornet's nest by putting them together and then waiting for them to stir up and encouraging them to stir up the pot. And so we're meant to choose a side, fly a flag, pick a side, choose a thing, and ultimately the people that are really in charge already know that the desired outcome. They want a financial reset. They want a governmental reset. They want it to be, they want a societal shift. They want more power given into the hands of the state and less individual liberty to be possessed by the person. Every single step along these ways, it moves towards that ultimate end. And so we are seeing this Hegelian reality at its greatest. And, how do you get people to depart and get away from their own personal liberty? How do you get people to give up on the comforts of their life? How do you get people to willingly hand over their own privacy and do these things? You do it through violence and strife, because you take away sort of the basic necessities and comforts, where it's a struggle for life and death, and even life it becomes cheaper. It's in fact, this is what John Dewey said about that. He said, war is the most effective preacher of the vanity of all merely finite interests. It puts an end to that selfish egoism of the individual by which he would claim his life and his property as his own or as his family's.
It sounds pretty communistic.
Well, yeah, it very much is, but it's even beyond communism. So, like, communism
Sure.
communism is an effect of Hegelian progression, right? It is that giving of the rights to the state, taking away the rights of the individual, and that allowance of, progress to be the good and the sought in thing. But it is a progress. But if you look at those leaders who were in the Soviet Union, they were rules for thee and not for me. And the same thing if you look at Nazi Germany. For Hitler, he didn't consider himself to be of the normal peasantry class to be able to be subject to all of the things that he instituted and enforced. No, he was himself, above that and beyond that, and so therefore, it is not the people in charge; it is the masses, and and then, like I said, case in point, all of the major financial institutions of Wall Street, they supported both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany at the same time during World War II. If you look at the purse strings of any of the major foundations and institutions, it's why there's nobody of the Ford family left as part of the Ford Foundation. They're so disgusted what their own foundation ended up becoming and how the money was being used. The money's still there, and they utilize it for all these progressive political ideals. But in reality, there's nobody in the Ford family left there, because they all left the foundation because it was so shocking and horrible what they were using it for.
Wow.
But if you look at these institutions, they're funding both sides of any of these conflicts. It's why they say only 30% of the munitions that we sent over to Ukraine actually ended up in Ukraine. 70% ended up in various other places, including Russia, and Palestine and Israel, and there's a reason. It's the it's yours and my tax dollars that are funding both sides of these conflicts ultimately, and um, because it is the conflict itself that is desired to create the higher end. If you Case in point, if you want a perfect example of that as well, is sort of like just out there to be seen easily at hand. We'll point at Donald Trump again. When he was running and he was talked about these things, what what was he sometimes called on the carpet about early on before he ever became president for, um, in terms of um, what in terms of what he could do, um, was his financial contributions as a citizen. Like how can you call Hillary, crooked Hillary, when you financially contributed to her campaigns in the past? How can you be against this person if you financially contributed to them? And he just said, you know, you can't do business in New York if you don't contribute to both sides, because it's absolutely true. You can't if you There are bigger powers at play to see you succeed or fail than than in they're on both sides of the aisle, and so you have to make that happen. Why did the CIA, uh, you know, were they heavily influenced in the drug cartels and drug running to the United States, and also the same federal government declares war on drugs in the United States, and leads to massive amounts of violence and imprisonment and breaking up of families and all of these things, because they create the struggle to have the desired outcome. The desired outcome in that case is to have completely subservient classes of people, that you ended up with. They knew that a lot of people getting wrapped up for 20-30 year sentences on minor drug crime charges at that time were your black families. And so therefore it was going to be, well, if we have all these families not only in poverty and addicted to drugs that we are providing them, but also break up the construct of the family and lock away the father so that you have single parent families, you create another generation of completely subservient people who are reliant on everything from the dole, from the state. And it's why we did that. And you create these never-ending conflicts: war on drugs, war on terror. How do you describe war on terror? How do you see that come to an end? You can't. Because you can't even define terror or terrorists.
Right.
We're seeing that now with Israel, right? That's another war on terror. But how do you describe? How do you label? All right, you want to say Hamas is a terrorist organization, but then they also want to say Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, and they also want to say, then they start getting into like actual formalized militaries of certain countries being terrorist organizations, and terrorism loses all definition because you have the never-ending war on terrorists, and war on poverty, war on drugs, war on these are we need the Hegelian system needs to create the conflict to progress their agenda. The conflict can't just exist by itself. It has to have a guided purpose and agenda that it is. But in the minds of these people, the conflict is necessary to gain that type of social reconstruction.
It's fascinating stuff, Father, and as you say, it is something that unfortunately is very prevalent in our society. I guess my question for you then, Father, and it's actually something we want to talk about in future podcasts. We want to do a series about why do we believe what we believe in politics? So, why do we vote for, I don't know, voting age? Why do we vote for conservatives, just in general, conservative values. Why? What do they actually mean? And to actually
Hmm.
go and try to go in deep and say, okay, minimum wage. Why do we, as conservatives, say we shouldn't raise minimum wage? And I'm not saying I'm not picking a side. I think it's just an interesting thought to say, okay, don't just pick a side, as you say, Father, because that's the issue when you're just
Yeah,
saying there are two sides. Let's pick one, even though,
I
as you say,
agree.
they're the same team. But I think if you actually try to understand the actual issue and say, okay, what is minimum wage and what does it mean if they raise it? I think that would be really, for me, it would be very helpful. And I think that's something that we hope to do here in the near future on the
Oh,
channel.
absolutely. I'd love to be part of that. I mean, because the reality of it is that even that basic idea, conservative versus progressive, you know, it's a dialectical problem. It boxes us into certain things, and we all fall victim of it. If you ask me my thoughts on immigration, my thoughts on immigration would probably get labeled as somewhat progressive. If you ask me my thoughts on, like, you know, minimum wage, there are aspects of that that'll be progressive, and there's aspects of that that would be conservative. It's if you ask me, like, the reality of it is that I'm a rational human being who has whose actions are dictated by the principles of Catholic morality and the laws of nature, and those don't fit into any political box at all. I've never been a registered Republican in my entire life because I'm not a Republican. I don't agree with a lot of stuff they do. You know, I don't. You know, I. It's an interesting concept. It's an interesting aspect to these things because we've got to stop boxing ourselves in and labeling ourselves one thing or another, because that ends up being where we fall into sort of like this, and we become more controllable in that way by these ultimate powers that be, in a sense, because you're allowing yourself to be told what you believe rather than actually believing and acting upon the way you
Exactly.
should.
Well, and I think for me too, Father, I think speaking for you as well, that it's not like we're saying don't go and vote and don't be involved in politics, but the point is, I mean, even from my side, I'd say be involved in politics one way or another, but understand what the actual what is the actual case you're discussing. Don't just pick a tribe. Don't just say, well, my side says this, or I mean, you brought Donald Trump up several times, and I think he did some things well. I think most things he didn't. But I
Yeah,
think if you start saying, okay, Donald Trump is this, yeah, orange man savior, and you just can't see him having done anything wrong, well, I mean, how productive is he going to be if no one holds him accountable, if he's going to be the next president, which is most likely? You can't just let him get away with being what he was the first time, because it wasn't
right.
good enough, not even close. And so, I mean, we need to understand, why wasn't he close to being good enough? It's not just the talk, it's not the funny memes and the funny video bits. I mean, there needs to be more, and we need to understand what that means. And I think it's important.
I think also to think that like you're going to find somebody in these higher echelons of politics to be any kind of solution is almost folly in itself. I mean, there, you know, you if you want to try to find where you can actually maybe do some good by voting or being involved, it's at your local level. You know,
Hmm.
it's
Exactly.
it's who runs for dog catcher is more important than who runs for president.
It's true.
And
Yeah.
it's because those guys are, you can't get to that level without selling out to the system. They just won't let you anymore. And maybe it's fatalistic, maybe it's but it's also realistic. It's I think we all kind of had like some like I had in my mind when Donald Trump first ran, like, not that I ever thought of him to be perfect or a savior or anything like that, far from it, but I thought, all right, maybe you can get a dissenting outside voice enough. And
Hmm.
boy, did that go! That bubble got popped really fast, and it was the realization, like, okay, it's more of the same. It's two sides to the same coin, and it doesn't matter. And so, like, but what can I do? What are the measures? Like, when that ballot comes around for election, You know, everybody that goes to a poll knows, who are the two candidates for president on the ballot, right? When that vote means nothing, and both in terms of scale and in terms of effect, like it means nothing. Whereas how many people going to that ballot box know all of the referendums and local, law changes that are up for vote on there? How many know who the candidates for sheriff are, or who knows who the um, the people who are up for local judgeships are? Those are the things that are going to have far more effect on your day-to-day life, and those are the things that are going to ultimately be something that you might have a little bit of control over, and you might get a good candidate in there. Case in point, I live in Butler County, Ohio. Our sheriff is Sheriff Jones, Sheriff Richard Jones. He is a large portion why we were able to never change and never shut down and never do anything whatsoever during COVID, because he got right up there. He was a guy that ended up on all the news channels because of it and everything like that. But I mean, like when our governor put in the mask mandate, 20 minutes after the governor announced the mask mandate for the state, our sheriff gets up there and says, "Don't call me if somebody comes into your store not wearing a mask. I'm not the mask police. I'm not coming." You know,
Awesome.
and when businesses started mandating the jab, he got up there on the pulpit and said, you know, how dare you, if you were a business, force medical procedure on somebody? You are the problem, not the solution to the problem. This is what our sheriff said on publicly on television. He when the governor tried to reinstitute more strict lockdown measures here in the county, because it's all like this, you know, which counties were hotter than other counties for COVID or whatnot. He upped Butler County's thing. Our sheriff gets on there and he says, you know, he's saying that our hospitals are over full and that we, can't that we need to, shelter and everything like that, and limit people coming into restaurants and whatnot further, and just do more strict restrictions because, supposedly our hospitals are overrunning. I go to our hospitals every day. There's plenty of room in them. Governor never called me to find out how things look on the ground here in Butler County, and he just issues these things from on high. So we're not enforcing them. Like
Wow.
these are the things that our sheriff did here in Butler County. It wasn't our governor. It certainly wasn't our president. It's your local aspect where you can maybe do some good, not, you know, where they want you to see where to take the fight is not where it matters. It has to be grassroots. It has to come up from below, and it has to be not chaotic fight, but rather organized. I see evil and I'm combating evil. There's a purpose behind what I'm doing. It's a purposeful fight. That just chaos for the sake of chaos, that Hegelian idea, that's their game. That's their goal, and it always leads towards progressivism. Like that's the fundamental principle behind it, and that's why they want you to play that game. It's to be a distraction. It's to take your eye off of what is important, and it is to focus you on something that you feel, like I said, you feel like you're contributing to, you feel like you're part of, you feel like this is important, because that's what every news outlet and every politician tells you is important. But at the end of the day, is it? No. At the end of the day, are there good guys between Israel and Palestine? No. Is there a good side between Ukraine and Russia? No. Was there a good side between us and the wars that we had in the Middle East? No. Was there a good side for World War II when you take all the pieces and add them together? No. You know, there wasn't. Show me a time when you could clearly demark in a struggle where you had the right side and the wrong side. And you have to go far back in time to find that reality.
Awesome, Father. As always, it's been extremely thought provoking, and I think again, I think you, as you said before the show and during the show, that it really is fitting for our times, and to realize what it is that whoever they are trying to get us to do. And I think again, it's so important and also again, not important to, you don't want to make this into this oh, we can't trust anyone, life's terrible, I'm just going to go hide in my home. I don't think that's the point at all. The point is to understand that they are trying to make us do this, trying to make us put one against the other, and it just, don't buy into it, and
Yeah,
understand these things, and look at it from an outside view, and see, okay, hey, this is what's actually going on, and then try to fix it, because of course that is our duty in the world. We do live in this world, and we should try to fix it.
by understanding the reality of the situation we're in, we can do something, even if it's small, that is productive and helpful. If we lie to ourselves and pretend the reality is what they've painted for us, then we can't. That's the ultimate thing. It's, if you want to, you know, we live in a time now where we have to break things down. Some of the things have to be broken down to like its bare essentials. Like, what are the things that you are absolutely unwilling to compromise on? Well, that should be, your faith, number one, and the ultimate well-being of your family and loved ones. That these are the things that it's like, no, I'm not, going to contribute in a way that's going to try to make things worse or harder for my kids or something like that. Like we kind of all can understand that. And where should our alliances be? It shouldn't be focused on, well, you have, this political sign in your yard, so I hate you because you wear a red hat or you wear a blue hat. It should be, no, my neighbors are the ones that I should be talking to and getting along with. Because if we all have a sense of little community around us, then then that's a little orb of power and control that you have, autonomy that you can, and influence that you can have. Society always has to, the good you can do from society always has to start at the smallest point and work its way out to the larger, not from the larger in to the smaller. That's the very reason why the whole entire Sacred Heart enthronement of the house was established by Christ and spread by the church, because it was the recognition that every family is its own small society. And if you can place Christ as the king and head of your small society, and you have a number of houses that do likewise, now you have, if you lived in a Catholic neighborhood, for instance, back in the, when those things existed before, that was the influence. Like, if you had your house enthroned to the Sacred Heart and Christ was made the head of your household, and your neighbors did likewise, and you had, all of a sudden you might not have a country that says Christ is the head of our country, but you had sections of the country, sections of these areas that lived according to that reality. And so it's no different now. You have to institute morality and faith and strength and all of these things in your family first, and then spread it out and share and have good conversations with people in your neighborhood after that. That even if it's somebody that you think stands polar opposite to you in the political spectrum, have an actual conversation with them. I bet you probably agree about 80% of the stuff that you care about. And when you can do stuff like that, then you're no longer the boogeyman down the street. You're a guy who's a nice guy who cares about his family and has similar concerns as they do. And so when all of a sudden the next psyop comes along and you're not going to wear a mask, or you're not going to, you're going to do something a little different, instead of that neighbor saying, you know what, I'm going to call the authorities on this person, or I'm going to berate them in the street or something like that, they're going to try to approach it from a little bit of a point of understanding, and maybe this common ground to be reached, and then you have influence, and then that influence, again, you have a neighborhood that's kind of on the same page and appreciates each other, then that can radiate outward further, but it has to start at its smallest point. And so, that's why those things are important. It's these big strifes, they're all just, facade. They're all, what was it, there was a, forget who wrote it or said it, I believe, but they said, the difference between about a democracy of democracy versus all um, other systems of rule is that in a democracy the sheep choose their slaughterer. And that's basically what it amounts to. You know what I mean? Like, you're not given a choice of savior, you're given a choice of one slaughterer over the other, and you can pick one or the other, but it's not the same thing. That ultimate top rule stuff is not relinquished with ease. That's a controlled aspect. But the stuff that we have at the grassroots, the ground level, the local level, there you can do some good. There you can have it so that 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 you can make influence, so that you to eliminate certain indecency on billboards, perhaps, or that your kids might see, or that you have certain, there you could have some actual influence and do some good. So
Awesome. Perfect. Father, that's a great way to end it, I think. And we hope everyone enjoyed this video. And hopefully everyone sticks around for more to come. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Let us know if you have any questions for Father. Leave it in the comment section. You can email me too.
They won't all be so dire sounding at the end, the future ones. They will be as relevant, but they will not be, or even more relevant, but they won't all be downers like this one ends up being, where it's like, oh yeah, we're all kind of controlled in a giant war against inconsequential things to create progress that we didn't want. Well, yeah, that's kind of a downer, but other aspects of it, they'll be just as relevant, but they won't always be as depressive, I promise.
Well, perfect, Father. As always, I'm looking forward to it. And until then, until our next show, God bless you.